So in the past 24 hours, we've got conflicting reports. The Iranians say that the Houthis are on the verge of collapse and that they're starting to pull out of Yemen because they just want to be away from that sinking ship when it finally goes under. But at the same time, or I should say one day later, an article came out in the New York Times citing Pentagon officials saying that U.S. air campaign with the Houthis, it's failing. It's not getting the job done. We're about to spend $1 billion. And by the way, the DOD is actually underreporting the amount of resources we're using in that fight. So it seems like these things can't all be true. So let's dig through and see what we can pick apart here. Of course, all of these sources will be linked in the description below. Starting out with kind of a different note, if you will, Jennifer Griffin over at Fox News reported that Secretary Hegseth has named this Operation Rough Rider, a nod to the troops Teddy Roosevelt led in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. I like that. I like operational names. I'm glad we got one here. I believe Prosperity Guardian is the overall name for ensuring freedom of navigation through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. So Operation Rough Rider seems much more focused on the actual military strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. But let's start out with this first article from The Telegraph that came out yesterday, where it says, quote, Iran abandons Houthis under relentless U.S. bombardment. Quote, Iran has ordered military personnel to leave Yemen, abandoning its Houthi allies as the U.S. escalates an airstrike campaign against the rebel group. A senior Iranian official said the move aimed to avoid direct confrontation with the United States if an Iranian soldier was killed. The official said Iran was also scaling back its strategy of supporting a network of regional proxies to focus on the direct threats from the United States instead. Tehran's primary concern, the source said, was Trump and how to deal with him. Every meeting is dominated by discussions about him, and none of the regional groups we previously supported are being discussed, the source said. Couple key things as we get into the rest of the articles here. All of these sources are anonymous, unnamed, speaking on the condition of anonymity, so take that for what it's worth. The information is being put out there, and then we have to sift through and decide, is it genuine information and they just don't want their identities disclosed because it's sensitive, or is it somebody seeding a story? And honestly, your guess is as good as mine. We're just going to try to use some common sense and logic to walk through it. So in this case, something that throws me off a little bit is the idea of Iran outwardly talking about doing away with some of these proxy groups. This axis of resistance that they put together is unfortunately very, very effective. There's a reason that groups like Hezbollah still exist today, heavily degraded by Israel, but still exist today. A lot of the militias across Iraq and Syria and the Houthis, it's very, very hard for the United States, Israel, or anyone else to really deal with this, this magnitude, these different groups throughout the Middle East. So the idea, it's one of Iran's major advantages. Right? They're not going to stand toe-to-toe with the United States or Israel in direct military confrontation. This is their cup of tea. So to see them openly talking about walking away from that, right as tensions are starting to spike, that's a little suspect to me. But continuing on with this article, the regime source in Iran said, quote, the view here is that the Houthis will not be able to survive and are living their final months or even days, so there is no point keeping them on our list. They were part of a chain that relied on Nasrallah, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, and Assad, and keeping only one part of that chain for the future makes no sense. Again, a lot of internal deliberations there, and no doubt Israel has dealt some significant blows to the axis of resistance in the last year and a half, coming up on 2 years. Hamas has been heavily degraded, right? Hezbollah is pretty significantly beat back. The Assad regime has fallen. A lot of the militias that were operating in Syria have disbanded or moved on. So they've been defanged in a lot of ways, but we haven't really seen anything like this quite yet, with Iran outwardly talking about maybe we just move on from that strategy as a whole. In fact, there was some pushback here from Qasser Arabi, who is an IRGC analyst, where he quoted this article and said, quote, highly skeptical of this report. It is based off an interview with an Iranian source. This looks like a propaganda psyop play by this source, as it's exactly what the regime wants the Trump administration to think is happening to keep the United States at bay. The Houthis have become even more strategically important to the IRGC since October 7th, not least with Hezbollah and Hamas obliterated. They went out of their way to prove to the IRGC that they're worthy of greater support, and from the IRGC's view, they've done a good job. So as much as I would like to look at that and say, yeah, Houthis are about completely destroyed, look at that, on the verge of collapse, there's reason to view that with some skepticism. But then we've got this other article here that essentially says, this was in the New York Times, just came out today, that says essentially we're failing at striking the Houthis. And also, I think there's some aspects in here we need to be skeptical of. This one titled, U.S. Strikes in Yemen, Burning Through Munitions with Limited Success. They say President Trump said this week that Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen have been decimated by the relentless strikes that he ordered beginning on March 15th. But that's not what Pentagon and military officials are privately telling Congress and allied countries. Again, unnamed, anonymous officials. Have to keep that in mind when running through this. In closed briefings in recent days, Pentagon officials have acknowledged that there have been only limited success in destroying the Houthis' vast, largely underground arsenal of missiles, drones, and launchers, according to congressional aides and allies. The officials briefed on confidential damage assessments say the bombing is consistently heavier than strikes conducted by the Biden administration and much bigger than what the Defense Department has publicly described. And the Defense Department has not publicly described much of this at all. I'm going to get into that in the back half of this video, but the information flow around this Operation Rough Rider, that we now know it's called, is minimal at best. And we do have a comparison. That's part of the challenge here for the current administration, is we can look back and say, well, what was the communication flow during the last wave of strikes against the Houthis? And it was a lot more. Spoiler alert. But continuing on with this article, they say in just 3 weeks, the Pentagon has used $200 million worth of munitions. The total cost could be well over $1 billion by next week, and the Pentagon might soon need to request supplemental funds from Congress, one U.S. official said. Now, there's all this negativity there, right? We're not actually getting the job done, and that could raise some suspicion as to why we're not hearing a whole lot from the DoD on the effectiveness of these strikes. I've got an idea for that one, by the way, that I'll get to here shortly. But there is some pushback in this article where another senior Pentagon official pushed back on Thursday, saying that the airstrikes had actually exceeded their goal in the campaign's initial phase, disrupting senior Houthi leaders' ability to communicate, limiting the group's response to a handful of ineffective counterstrikes, and setting the conditions for subsequent phases. So, again, they're all unnamed officials. This is one of those. It's frustrating. Honestly, I'm sure everybody's frustrated. Like, those are directly contradictory. Are they successful or are they not successful? One of the challenges we have here is that the Pentagon has not provided details about these strike campaigns since March 17th, when in that press conference, they said that more than 30 Houthi targets had been hit on the first day. And this is something that, going back to Jennifer Griffin, who's a Pentagon correspondent for Fox, she kind of went through a thread on this yesterday, where she said the U.S. has been striking Houthi targets in Yemen for 20 straight days since the U.S. military operation was launched on March 15th. 21 straight days now, because we got another one today. The Pentagon has not held a briefing for journalists since March 17th, and U.S. Central Command has not been putting out press releases about the operation. When reporters request information from DoD and CENTCOM about the military operation in Yemen, even on background, we are told they cannot answer our questions, which is a break from the past. And I mentioned that, the challenge for this administration is we do have like a direct one-to-one comparison. So she writes, under the Biden administration, CENTCOM, or Central Command, carried out 112 days of airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen after October 17, 2023, when the Iranian-backed proxy began firing drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles into the Red Sea shipping lanes. In February, on his first overseas trip, Defense Secretary Hegseth loosened the rules of engagement, expanding the range of military targets, and eased White House oversight so that commanders in the field had more autonomy to carry out airstrikes. Since March 15th, the Trump administration has carried out 20 straight days of airstrikes in Yemen with dozens of targets each night. And she has a roll-up here. I'll copy and paste this video into the video, but she shows a roll-up of all of the announcements from CENTCOM talking about these strikes. And this is actually where we run into this challenge of you just have to try to believe someone at the end of the day. And I think a lot of people in the United States are prone to believe the U.S. over Iran or the Houthis. But part of the challenge here, and I think we're dropping the ball unnecessarily, is we're not countering some of these Houthi claims. So the Houthis have claimed that they've fired cruise missiles and drones at U.S. ships in the Red Sea, I think 5 times in the past 4 days, almost daily attacks. Right now, in that first press conference that I want to say was on the 17th that the DoD held, they made a statement about this. And they said, yeah, we know the Houthis talked about firing missiles. There was something that landed about 100 miles away from us. I think there's some value in doing that. So right now, just looking in the last couple of days, the Houthis have claimed a bunch of attacks. They always say they're successful for what it's worth. And maybe the success is just launching the munition. But here's the deal. And there's a stark contrast with the administrations, and this is where it gets frustrating because I feel like we're dropping the ball and we don't have to. So we saw a lot of announcements from CENTCOM and the ships out in the Red Sea showing footage of interceptions, or at the very least announcing that there had been interceptions, saying we shot down 2 Houthi drones, we shot down 3 cruise missiles, or 1 ballistic missile missed us by a long distance. That's not giving up any operational information. right? The Houthis know they launched it, and you can just put out some information kind of acknowledging, hey, we know you launched it. From our end, nothing was successful. By not putting anything out there, no counter to that at all, it's allowed the Houthis to kind of run with that argument that these strikes are, quote, successful. Now, I don't mean to suggest that the strikes have actually struck any U.S. ships. There's no evidence of that, and I'd be surprised at this point if any had. So I'm not trying to even suggest in the slightest that the DoD is covering up anything like that, but why not? Every time the Houthis announce one of these strikes, just have somebody stand up, do a little quick press conference at CENTCOM and say, 30-second clip. Be like, all right, well, the Houthis said that they launched 2 cruise missiles, 2 ballistic missiles, and 7 drones at the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, and looks like none of those came within 50 miles except 1 cruise missile that we successfully shot down. Like, that will embarrass the Houthis, right? It's showing that they're just like that initial press conference back on the 17th did, where they just laughed and said like 100 miles, they're not even close. Just do that. So I would like to see more of that from DoD. It's a way to put this information out to kind of compete in the information space, if you will. And the Houthis are good at this game. They've been doing this for quite a while. So I'd like to see more from DoD talking about how we are successfully intercepting these, or if not, that they're missing by a wide range. And that's where I get a little confused here, because the Houthis, again, under the Biden administration, multiple launches were close to American ships. If they are all of a sudden missing us by hundreds of miles every time, that's like borderline firing in the wrong direction. That tells us something about the status of their military force, their targeting, their capabilities. That would be a big change. So if that is the case, that'd be interesting to know. If that's not the case, if something drastically like that hasn't changed, then you would have to expect that they're not missing by more today than they were just a few months ago. But I should say, big picture overall, CENTCOM DoD is under no obligation to share any of this information with us at all. End of story. So the fact that they do put it out, helps me try to keep up with what's going on. I think helps the general public understand what's happening. But in cases like this, it could be helpful. Right? We've got conflicting reports. The Iranians under a suspect source saying it's so successful, we're getting out of Yemen. This is a bad deal for us. The Houthis are on their last leg. And then actually U.S. officials saying nothing's going here, guys. This is not doing the trick. So if we actually had more kind of direct reports from CENTCOM, from DoD talking about the actual operations, it might help to kind of split that gap and better understand exactly how this operation is playing out. But nonetheless, I will put all of the links to these different articles and sources in the description below if you want to check them out. Hopefully a little bit of an insight into Operation Rough Rider that we now know it's called. We'll keep an eye on it and see how it develops going forward. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.